Verse 609. Heat, fluidity, motility, solidity. Such notions are discriminated by the ignorant. There is a system of relations. No individual objects exist. Hence the denial of self-nature. We basically covered this in the previous video. What we've got here is the conventional explanation for there being no such thing as self-nature. I said conventional, but I really mean philosophical. The philosophical argument for there being no self-nature. And what's meant by self-nature is the understanding that every individual has something, has some essence, some metaphysical essence which identifies them as an individual, as a unique individual. In Hinduism this would be the jiva, or we can understand it in terms of soul. And the philosophical argument is that everything's interdependent. It's all a matter of relationships, interrelationships. I suppose we could understand it in terms of process. Everything is process. There aren't any things as such. There is no essential thingness. So this is a philosophical argument. And it's kicked off here by a mention of heat, fluidity, motility and solidity. And these are the four elements. Well, not exactly. We're not told fire, water, air and earth. We're told the actual qualities by which we experience these four elements. And at their most fundamental level, I find this actually quite a useful way of relating to them. They define our degrees of freedom, our abilities to move. So motility, which represents the element air, means freedom of movement. We can move in any direction. If there's something solid in the way, then we can't move. It's the opposite of air. It's the opposite of motility. It limits us, provides full-on resistance. The other two elements are similar. Fluidity means that there's movement, but with some resistance. So it's a kind of in-between thing. And heat, well, that's an interesting one. Heat also provides limitation. If there's a raging fire there, we don't go there, we can't go through it. It's probably not as impassable as solidity. We might be able to jump through it. Depends how deep it is. But it's also a limitation to our freedom of movement. So I find this quite a useful way of defining us. We could maybe even throw in gravity there as a fifth element. But never mind that. On the more conventional understanding, we can understand air as that vital principle. It's what keeps us alive. Solidity is our body. Fluidity is our blood. And heat is the combustion processes which go on. So we can take it up a step to the more obvious understanding of what everything is comprised of in terms of these four elements. But we're told that such notions are discriminated by the ignorant. So there's this understanding that everything is made up of the elements. We don't have to go with the 4 traditional elements, we can go with the elements of the periodic table. And I went into this in depth in the previous video. What this conveys is the idea that there is some truer reality. There's this idea that there's another reality, more real than the one that presents itself to us, and that's the reality of the elements, or of atoms and subatomic particles. And so there's a system of relations. In other words, we can understand it in terms of chemical reactions. Everything's an interplay of subatomic particles. So it's not very satisfactory, this, from a spiritual point of view. Because it's a purely philosophical, intellectual understanding. I think of the red spot on Jupiter. It looks like a thing, an object, but it's actually a huge storm which has been raging for hundreds of years. So it's a process, but at the same time, as far as we're concerned, it's a thing. It has its own nature. As do you, as do I. We can all regard ourselves as processes, as a system of interrelations, as a system of interrelationships, of interactions. But on an emotional level, we are things, and this philosophical argument doesn't really cut much ice. What we need to do is forget all that, reject the idea of some kind of substratum, a substratum of elements, of atoms. We can go along with it conventionally in terms of conventional understanding, just as we talk about sunrise and sunset. Even though the sun's not doing anything, it's the earth going round the sun. We don't adjust our language to suit the physical reality. We keep the language because it suits our everyday understanding. So as far as we're concerned, there are things which have their own identity. And this argument doesn't undermine that in the slightest. So spiritually, what we need to do is practice the insight, the realization that actually all of this is simply the play of consciousness, just as a dream is. This is the avenue we must pursue, and just drop the understanding that's being presented in this verse, very limited understanding. We need to come back to the awareness that is the absolute nature of our everyday attention, the attention which is hearing this, the attention which is right here. And in that awareness, in that observation, come back to that spaciousness which is right here, right now. So the reason that things actually do have no self-nature is because of their dreamlike nature, because they are constructions in consciousness. Now this is not an intellectual argument, an intellectual statement. This is a realization. It's a realization which happens when there's true appreciation, true insight into the nature of our everyday tension.